Chopin's Ballade Number 1 had been running through my head all morning like a nervous flutter in my chest. It didn't matter. There wouldn't be a piano anywhere near the morning shift at the accounting office. They all knew about my fixation with music. Every colleague smiled about it in that condescending way, as if I were in kindergarten. But that Monday, with the city's sunlight sliding through dirty blinds, desperate to touch something beautiful, I felt the acute grief of possibility dying in a grey cubicle. The only sound inside the elevator was the shuddering of old cables. When the doors pinged open on 7, I braced myself, inhaled a shallow breath and walked to my desk. The numbers from last week's payroll report stared up at me, malfunctioning and ugly, but the real numbers, the ones I cared about, measures, tempos, counting rests and runs, lived somewhere back in my fingers. My boss, Greg, swept past. He always strode, never walked. His cologne marked his path like an afterthought. "Rachel, my office." No inflection. I hesitated only a split second before following, heels catching on a snag in the carpet. His glass-walled office never kept sound from bouncing out. He folded his hands as I entered, pupils tight in the morning glare. "I got your expense sheet." He tapped the paper. "Did you really ask for another morning off for what was it? An audition at the Disney Hall?" My cheeks warmed, my skin prickling under his stare. I glanced at the document, at my careful language, member audition Los Angeles Philharmonic. "I did," I said, soft but steadfast. He set his jaw, chuckled. "It was almost kind if you didn't know him. How many of these things do you need to chase, Rachel? We need you here. Do you see yourself on stage in a dress, waving at President Biden? Let's be real." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to punch the desk, tear through the glass wall, and shout about octaves and arpeggios and Rachmaninoff's third. Instead, I said nothing. He leaned back and shook his head. "Dreams are cute, but you're not a kid, you're not rich, and you're not ready to quit your day job, believe me. Cancel the next one. I'll dock the morning if you go again." I left his office with my head bowed, colleagues biting back smirks or glancing away. That was the last time I saw Greg, and the last day I wore those shoes. Outside on the street, cars glinted in the sunlight, horns sighing against the haze. I didn't go back to my desk. I never went back to that floor again. I walked until downtown opened up, until crowds thickened, until I could no longer hear that voice inside telling me to keep my head down and do as I was told. By the time I got to my car, I understood something. I'd been grieving for myself long before that morning. Grieving for the girl who'd played Chopin in a drafty living room, who spent afternoons running through scales, ignored by relatives shouting at the TV. I grieved because clarity had come the moment Greg laughed. I realized it would never stop, not until I either proved them wrong or surrendered completely. That night in my Koreatown apartment, bare walls, half-filled bookshelves, keyboard wedged between the futon and the fridge, I called my sister. She answered on the third ring. "You didn't get fired again, did you?" Pat's tone was bored, flat, as if she was reciting the news. "I quit," I said, voice surprisingly steady, the tiniest bit proud. "I'm going for this full time. I have enough gigs lined up at restaurants, private lessons, and a accompanist slot at the conservatory. I can make it work." Silence, then the unmistakable sound of her exasperated sigh. "You're obsessed. You're not some prodigy, Rach. Mom's worried, Dad says you need health insurance, and no offense but piano, in LA, go chase a tech job instead like a normal person." I heard her hang up before I could reply, the grief strung worse for its predictability. That summer the heat was relentless. My studio would bake all afternoon and cool at 2 in the morning. My fingertips bled the first week, paired with an ache buried deep in the knuckles, a warning, perhaps, of what happens when you pick up a complicated piece after months of neglect. Rachmaninoff's concertos mocked me with their impossibility, but nothing felt better than those hours alone, touching the plastic keys of my Yamaha and remembering what it meant to play, really play. Not for applause or money, not for survival, but because that was the only time the world outside, the bosses, the family, my own doubts, blunted into a distant background hum. It was the hum of the city. The hum of musicians everywhere, countless voices longing to matter. I filled my weeks with odd gigs, background music at mother-daughter teas, violin-piano duets in equi-church basements, funerals. I learned to observe each setting, read crowds, play softer or slower, adapt on the spot. I eyed the tips jar like it held the promise of my future, dividing 20s for groceries and gas. The months blurred, autumn came. Instead of falling into comfort during Thanksgiving with my family, I declined the invitation and spent the day performing at a tiny jazz bar in Silver Lake. I played Satie's Gymnopédie No. One near midnight, the slow melody flooding the smoky, nearly empty room. A woman wept quietly at her table. She pressed a $50 bill into my palm on the way out, and I held it as if it were a blessing. Holidays sharpened the ridicule. My phone lit up with group texts, cousins bragging about promotions, my aunt's endless forwardings of job posts, Pat snide, "You make any real money yet?" pop-ups. I didn't reply, I couldn't, not without betraying how thin my bravado had become. My parents left long voicemails full of worry, never outright anger, but that dull ache of disappointment. The lowest point hit in February after yet another failed audition. My hands had shaken so badly on stage that I missed a crucial phrase. The panel was polite but dismissed me quickly, as if I was someone else's burden. I sat on the steps outside the audition hall for nearly an hour, pressed against the concrete, listening to other musicians packing up inside, cases thudding, laughter bouncing luxuriously. I almost called Pat, hoping she'd at least soften her voice. In the end, I just listened to the rain picking up, a rhythm that didn't need me to direct it. There's a peculiar clarity that comes after certain types of grief, the kind that's too persistent to fight. You accept it, carry it with you, use it as ballast, not anchor. Something in me shifted that night. If I had to play every bar in the city, accompany every last-minute amateur, teach every nervous child up until I could fill the days and pay rent, I would. But I'd audition again too. As long as I had hands, my own flawed, aching hands, I'd use them. There was a summer festival in Echo Park, small, local, a few hundred people drifting between food trucks and art stalls. Through some miracle or the mercy of a bartender I'd become friends with, I landed a featured slot. It was an outdoor upright, the keys sticking and splintering beneath my fingers, but when I sat down, the sun dappling the grass, a calm overtook me. I played Debussy first, Clair de Lune, not because it was easy, but because it spoke of yearning and soft possibility. Midway through, a hush settled. People had stopped eating, stopped walking, just to listen. It was like drawing a line on water with my hands, seeing the ripples. I lost myself in the music, and for the first time in months, didn't hear my family's doubts or Greg's voice. The applause at the end was scattered but real. That clip made its way onto social media. Within a week, I saw tagged posts, people naming me that piano girl at Echo, and more importantly, a message in my inbox from a young composer looking for a pianist for a chamber piece premiere. I nearly deleted it, assuming it was spam, but checked twice and replied yes before I could doubt myself. The rehearsal space was nothing like the majestic halls I'd dreamed of, a church basement with sticky floors and peeling paint. But the feeling, the push-pull of collaborating, shaping each bar, arguing over tempo, was intoxicating. We worked long hours. I played the premiere with sweaty palms and a dry throat. That was the first time Dad messaged me out of the blue. "I saw something about a concert, proud of you, call soon." The words almost made me cry, almost. "Next time, bring the whole family," I texted and smiled so hard it hurt. Life didn't transform overnight. Months passed, full of missed trains, lessons taught in cramped apartments, cancelled gigs, broken shoes, and silent nights. But the work became steadier, more rewarding. Word got around, Rachel plays with feeling. She shows up. She fights for every note. I became slowly something like necessary. The composer referred me to others. I started accompanying musicals, playing weddings for actors and producers, teaching richer families' kids diploma pieces from the ABRSM. My own concert, a solo venture at a dimly lit club downtown, drew 40 people. 2 of them ended up booking me for future gigs. I bought a real piano, a battered old Kawai upright, from a retired gentleman on Melrose who wept as I hauled it away. Sometimes, sitting at night with the city's blink and buzz outside my open window, I'd catch a trace of that old grief, usually on the nights when money ran thin or loneliness gnawed. But more often I found myself holding something else inside, not joy exactly, but a hard-won faith. I could do this, rough as it was. 3 years passed, the world meanwhile spun on. My sister married, had a baby, and bought a house in Westchester with her husband, Josh. Pat sent the occasional photo of her newborn, laughter and pudgy fists, and sometimes a snarky "hope you're not starving" attached to a meal delivery coupon. Mom and Dad got older, grew softer. They stopped trying to talk sense into me and focused on sending care packages with cookies and tiny tea bags. I saw them less but missed them more. The big break, the real, undeniable one, came unexpectedly. I received an invitation to audition for a seat with the LA Chamber Players after one of their pianists stepped down for health reasons. There would be one guest performance, a gala event at Walt Disney Concert Hall, open to public and press, and then, if I impressed, a contract for next season. For 2 weeks I barely slept. I relearned the repertoire. My hands and wrists burned anew, but my mind was sharp. At the audition, the old fears came in shaking waves, but I played through them. The judges, famous faces, some unfriendly, nodded, frowned, scribbled notes. I got the call back a week later. I would perform as guest soloist. My name would be in the program. Byron HSU, the principal conductor, wrote in a follow-up email, "Your playing is honest, it moves us. That matters." On the day of the gala, I arrived early, clutching my borrowed gown, heels wobbling. The hall was intimidating, even empty, angled walls, sunlight streaming in high windows, a shrine of possibility. I walked the stage, fingertips grazing the Steinway's lid. They announced me last. As I walked on, applause thundered, unfamiliar and thrilling. Somewhere in the fifth row, I glimpsed my mother shrinking into her chair and my father sitting upright, eyes shining. Pat and Josh were beside them, baby on Pat's knee. I wiped my palms on the dress, centered myself, and began. It wasn't perfect. I heard one missed note, but I focused on the shape of the music, the grace notes, the inhale before a new phrase. The piece soared and the hall received it, every breath, every hush, like a sacred trust. My hands were no longer just mine, they belonged to every audience member, every skeptic, every past version of me who doubted I'd reach this place. Something in me healed that night quietly, without drama or grandeur. After the performance, as the crowd dissipated, I stood with my family in the lobby. Pat swallowed her words at first, then finally broke the silence. "You were good," she muttered, fixing her gaze on my shoes. "Really good, Ratch." Josh grinned, baby drooling on his shoulder. "You sure this isn't some fancy YouTube prank?" "Shut up," Pat snapped, but her eyes glistened. My father lingered, taking a measured breath. "I didn't know, I knew you played, but this," he gestured, searching for words, "this is yours, you made it real." Mom dabbed her eyes, slipped her arm around me. "We're all proud." "I'm so sorry we ever," she couldn't finish. Before I could reply, a few of my old coworkers from the accounting office, faces I hadn't expected, stepped up, drinks in hand. "Rachel," one said, surprise and admiration mingling in her voice. "We just saw you play. Greg said you'd never, well, anyway, guess he was wrong, huh?" Their eyes, full of realization and maybe a touch of regret, met mine. In that moment, the humiliation of years before fell away. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. All I felt was release, a grief laid to rest. I brought my family backstage, showed them the Steinway towering, immaculate, gleaming under the lights. Mom ran her hand across the black lacquer as if touching some artifact. Dad snapped a picture, his hands trembling, and Pat laughed, truly laughed for the first time in years. A photographer asked to snap a picture of all of us together. We smiled, forced at first, then easier. I saw myself reflected in the piano's surface, older, lined, but resolute. We rode home together. My parents talked about visiting more, bringing homemade food. Pat invited me for dinner that weekend, promising not to bring up jobs or insurance. Later, alone in my apartment, I poured myself a cup of weak tea. The city outside was the same, bright, loud, indifferent, but I was not. I turned on my battered old Kawai, pressed a few soft keys, and let the music fill the room. I wasn't searching for proof anymore. I was simply home, and for the first time my hands did not shake.